Good morning, everybody. Hope you're all okay and you had a nice weekend. So, I was watching some films and reading some books over the weekend, and I've decided that I'm going to put a list of my favourite Alistair MacLean books and films together. So, Alistair MacLean was a contemporary of Ian Fleming, who, of course, wrote the James Bond novels. His first novel came out in 1955. It was HMS Ulysses. It was based on his own experiences serving aboard ships in the Arctic convoys in the Second World War. It led him on to a very successful career as a novelist, and unfortunately he passed away in 1987. I'm an absolute MacLean devotee. I've read every single one of his novels at some point in my life, but a lot of his novels turned into films. So just like I did with the James Bond books and films, I'm going to do a comparison between the two and put a listing together of my favourites. So we'll start with his TV movies. So The Way to Dusty Death originally was a Formula One based novel. It was written in 1973. It was going to star Jackie Stewart because it was originally going to be a film, but it got turned into a novel because they couldn't sell the film rights. At the time, Formula One was really dangerous. People were dying left, right and centre. Somebody would be killed or seriously injured every single year without fail. And MacLean's imagination filled in the rest. Essentially, the book is a conspiracy by the people who are running Formula One to try to make the sport more exciting. And there's like a smuggling operation going on, and a guy called Johnny Harlow, who is our hero, is determined to take these people out and find out what exactly is going on, why all these people are dying in this sport. The film that came out is a TV movie. The only thing that I can say about it is it has Linda Hamilton in it. They changed Formula One to be some sort of sports car race, and the conspiracy in it is all about diamond smuggling rather than what was going on in the book. I don't think it's as good as the novel in any way, shape or form. It's one that I would recommend only if you're a completist, and also if you like Linda Hamilton, which I do. Next one is Hostage Tower. It's kind of like a riff on Die Hard, except it came out a few years before. Essentially, the Eiffel Tower is held hostage and everybody else on it is, so they send in a special forces team to take the tower back and take the bad guys out. The book actually was not written by Alistair MacLean. He came up with the bare bones of the story. By the late 70s, early 80s, there were rumours that his novels were being ghostwritten because he was a chronic alcoholic at the time, and so his writing, if you read those later books, things like Athabasca and Santorini, they're nowhere near as good as the early ones. The writing style also seems to be different. Hostage Tower is not one of my favourites. The other one is Death Train. The thing that makes this one stand out is the fact that Captain Picard is ordering around James Bond in the guise of Pierce Brosnan. Yeah, Patrick Stewart and Pierce Brosnan are in this particular film. Again, it was not written by MacLean, it was written by a guy called Alistair MacLean, but MacLean came up with the idea for it. The plot is Christopher Lee, who is a mad Russian general, has put a nuclear bomb aboard a train that's going across Eastern Europe, and Malcolm Philpott, played by Patrick Stewart, is the head of this anti-terrorist task force, and he gets Pierce Brosnan to board the train and stop the bad guys and take hold of the bomb. It's kind of similar to The Golden Rendezvous in the fact that there's an atomic bomb present that's being used as a ploy. The film is actually not bad. It's worth watching, even if it's just for the novelty value of Jean-Luc Picard ordering around Pierce Brosnan. Certainly not one that I would turn down. So going on to his actual films, I think it's fairly well known that the weakest of MacLean's films is The Caravan to Vacaresse. It's also not his best novel. Essentially, the gypsies are going in caravans to the south of France for their annual pilgrimage, and people start dying, and so the British Secret Service, for whatever reason, decide to send our guy in to find out what's going on. About the only thing I can recommend about this film is the fact that Graham Hill, the Formula One driver, turns up as a helicopter pilot towards the end and is trying to buzz our guy, kind of similar to the end of From Russia with Love. Beyond that, I can't think of anything to recommend it. It's very pedestrian. The one after that is River of Death. This was a very late Alistair MacLean novel. The plot is basically recycled from Fear is the Key, which we'll come back to later. Essentially, the film stars Michael Dudikoff, of all people, Donald Pleasance, and Napoleon Solo himself, Robert Vaughan. And Napoleon Solo is actually a Nazi who escaped to the jungles of Brazil, kind of like the boys from Brazil. And Donald Pleasance hires Michael Dudikoff to find him because he has a score to settle. That's basically it. The actual adventure down the river, down the Amazon River, is more exciting than the denouement. The book is kind of all over the place. It's just mishmashes and bits of little things taken from other Alistair MacLean films and books which are better. The film is one of those rainy Sunday afternoon events. You watch it once, you've seen it, and that's it. I would have to stretch to say, yes, go and watch this film. The next one is The Golden Rendezvous. The book and the film are very, very unlikely in their setup. Essentially, a cargo liner has a casino aboard it, and John Vernon, who was the bad guy in virtually every 70s film, including Fear is the Key, has an atomic bomb which he places aboard the ship and is going to hold all these rich people aboard the casino ship to ransom, as well as the bomb. And Richard Harris is the second in command of the ship, is going to take him out. It's a very, very similar setup to the movie North Sea Hijack with Roger Moore, and Juggernaut, which also had Richard Harris as a guy disposing bombs aboard a ship whose people are being held for ransom. Those two films are far more entertaining. Golden Rendezvous, it has its moments, both the book and the film. The film follows the book fairly closely. Richard Harris actually had a hand in rewriting the film because it just wasn't working. The script was kind of all over the place, and he got a lot of the blame for the film falling behind. They tried to blacklist him, and he said, well, hold on a minute, I'm trying to make your film better for you. It's not one that's a classic, but it's worth watching in its own way. It's entertaining. It doesn't last forever, and it's got a pretty decent ending, so I'll say it's an okay one. Next one is Bear Island. This one has Donald Sutherland. The book and the film, the plots are very similar, but the actual book is more of a murder mystery than an action thriller. It's also more about a film crew who is going to Bear Island to film around rather than what actually happens, which is a bunch of guys who are actually specifically there to try and recover a load of Nazi gold aboard a submarine in a submarine base which has been left over from the Second World War. The plot it could have done with some more work. It's a little bit all over the place. It's like a Pierce Brosnan Bond film. Donald Sutherland makes a really good hero. Again, Christopher Lee's in it as some mad guy. Lloyd Bridges is in it as well as some guy who looks about 90, who's supposedly about 30. It's got some good chasers, it's got some good action scenes, but overall the plot just doesn't click together very well. The book is better than the film, I would say. Next one is The Secret Ways. This was actually the very first Alistair MacLean adaptation. It's based on the book The Dark Frontier. It's very much a Cold War thriller. It features Richard Widmark as a guy who is tasked to go to Eastern Europe to bring back a revolutionary called Jansky. It has a real Third Man vibe, the way it looks, the way it's filmed, the way that the whole thing has atmosphere, the Eastern European setting. It's very, very reminiscent of Carol Reed. The book, again, I think is better than the film in the way that it plays out. The film takes a long time to get going. It takes a good 45 minutes to an hour to set the plot up and so on, but once it's going, it moves along at a rapid pace. I think Richard Widmark is kind of miscast because originally in the book, our hero was British, and basically Richard Widmark bought the rights and he said, I'm going to make a film out of this because I think it's pretty good. So I can't fault him for that, and it did prove that Alistair MacLean was viable on the big screen, so there is that to it. Like I say, it has a real film noir kind of feel to it, which is helped by the fact that it's filmed in black and white. It's one that I would say, okay, go ahead and watch it with the proviso of it's very much a product of its time, because it takes quite a long time to get going. The one after that is The Satan Bug. This was based on a novel written under the pseudonym Ian Stewart. The plot is kind of similar to One of Majesty's Secret Service. Essentially, a mad scientist has developed a virus called the Satan Bug, which is going to unleash on London unless his demands are met, and our guy is brought in to find him and stop him. The film is transplanted the action to California. It doesn't really have a lot of heavy action going on in it. It is worth watching. It has that real sort of 1960s shot out of a cannon look. Everybody's got a perfectly pressed suit. Everything is very sunny. Everything is very bright and in your face. It's got a real ominous vibe to it, especially during the lab scenes when they're actually developing this virus. I think the motivation of the bad guy is a bit all over the place, because he wants to develop this virus to wipe out the human race to save the human race. That's what it boils down to. It's kind of a bit clunky, but okay. Again, I think the book plays out better than the film. This is the point where I'm going to mention a book which I think would have played out really well as a film but never did. It's called The Dark Crusader. In America it's called The Black Shrike, again under the pseudonym of Ian Stewart. The plot is absolutely pure James Bond. It's the most James Bond novel that Alistair MacLean ever wrote. Our guy is called John Bentel. He's dispatched by his boss, Colonel Rain, to go and investigate why a whole load of rocket scientists have gone missing. He himself is a rocket scientist, and he is given the job of finding out what's going on. So this is so James Bond, it's not even funny. Eventually the trail leads into Australia, where he encounters this mad scientist who is after an experimental missile called the Black Shrike. Again, this is just so Bond, it's not even funny. The plot is almost exactly the same as Moonraker, the novel. One thing leads to another, and our guy has to take the bad guys down. I think it would have made a really good film, although You Only Live Twice and Thunderball are kind of in the same ballpark. And if you've read Moonraker, you know where this plot is going. I think the Black Shrike, or as it's called in Britain, The Dark Crusader, I think actually does play out better than Moonraker and the James Bond films. It has an awful lot more stakes to it. The other book that I would like to mention that I think would have made a really good film is Goodbye California. Goodbye California is kind of similar to The Golden Gate, which is an earlier book by MacLean, but is a lot better structured. Our guy, Sergeant Ryder, is brought in. The bad guy, Morrow, has stolen a whole load of atomic bombs. He's planted them in the San Andreas vault, and he says that he's going to detonate them unless his demands are met. This is so A View to a Kill, it's not even funny. Mac Zorin's scheme in A View to a Kill is basically exactly the same as this guy's. He's going to sink California for his own ends, although his reasons for doing so are different. And so Sergeant Ryder has to find Morrow, get into his encampment, and take him out. Again, I think it would have made a really good film, although you could argue that A View to a Kill was that film. I think that it's probably the last really good Alistair MacLean novel before he started really sinking into alcoholism. I think that would have made a really good one. Next film I'd like to mention is Ice Station Zebra. The book plays out better than the film. The book has an awful lot of atmosphere. In fact, it just oozes atmosphere. It's mostly set aboard a submarine during the Cold War. Essentially, a spy satellite has been shot down by the Russians, and it's a race against time to get to an Arctic research station to get hold of the contents of the satellite. So in the film, of course, we had Patrick McGowan and Rock Hudson, who were trying to get to the Arctic research site. There is a murder mystery in the book which doesn't really feature as much in the film, although when Ernest Borgnine turns up, you kind of know where this is going. It's got the standard Alistair MacLean thing of there is a traitor and he needs to be found. that plays out in the story. I think the book is better than the film, but the film is more exciting to watch. Although it does take about another half hour, 45 minutes to set up, and the film is quite long, it's about 2.5 hours. Next one is Force 10 from Navarone. This is a sequel to The Guns of Navarone, although it's not really a sequel. It features a couple of the same characters in the book that were in the film, and the earlier book, of course, but it's a completely different story in a completely different setting, so you don't need to watch or read The Guns of Navarone to understand what's going on. The mission is to blow up a dam to protect the Yugoslav partisans who are under the threat from the Nazis. The film is more workmanlike than inspired, which is kind of unusual when you consider that it was made by Guy Hamilton, the guy who made Goldfinger and Live and Let Die. It has an awful lot of people who worked and appeared in the Bond films. Richard Keel and Barbara Bach are both in it, and a very young Harrison Ford pops up just after he had made Star Wars and just before he made Indiana Jones as the American lead in Heavy. It's not a bad film, it's just a little bit uninspired. Edward Fox, who of course had been in The Day of the Jackal, is one of the two guys who's on the mission, and it's his idea to blow up the dam in a certain way. And Robert Shaw, in one of his last film roles, again after he'd made Jaws, is in this, and he's really good. Overall, I would say it's one to watch on a rainy afternoon. It's not an out-and-out classic like a couple of his other films, but it's not a bad film and it's not a bad read. Next one is Breakheart Pass. Now, this is a bit of an unusual one. The film stars Charles Bronson as supposedly a criminal who's been transported aboard a train through the wilderness. The plot is that a whole load of guns are being transported aboard a train to this army base to being used against the Native Americans, and Charles Bronson is an undercover secret agent who's out to stop them and find out what's going on with all the smuggling. It's fairly standard Alistair MacLean, lots of smuggling, lots of double dealing. The film is actually very entertaining, although the premise sounds completely unlikely. The book was written at a time the producer Elliot Kastner, which I'll come back to in a second, he convinced MacLean to write this. MacLean had started drinking heavily, and so Kastner gave him an office in a film studio and said, go and write a novel and we'll make a film out of it. And Alistair MacLean came up with this. It sounds completely wacky, but the end result is very entertaining. And especially because Charles Bronson in it. I mean, Charles Bronson is one of the most manly guys you'll have ever seen on film. Next one, Puppet on a Chain. The film plays out better than the book. In the book, our guy Paul Sherman is an Interpol agent. In the film, he's a DEA agent from America. He's following a smuggling ring to Amsterdam. Again, this is a bit Diamonds Are Forever and a bit Live and Let Die. The bad guy in it is called Magren. He has an entire village on a Dutch island which is involved in this drug smuggling scheme. Kind of similar to Dr. Kananga in Live and Let Die. In the book, Sherman is kind of useless. He has two female assistants, Belinda and Maggie. In the film, that's condensed down to just Maggie, which again plays out better. Sherman actually does a lot of the legwork that Belinda and Maggie do in the book. So he's actually much more of an effective agent in the film. The ending features a massive boat chase that again was put into Live and Let Die. The leading man, a guy called Sven Bertil Torp, it doesn't on the surface seem to be very good, but actually he's not bad, he's watchable. I think that like I say, the film plays out better than the book, because in the book Sherman keeps getting caught by the bad guys and keeps being relieved of his weapons and interrogated and then let go, and then he keeps being caught again, and all of that is condensed down. In the book, he's actually a lot better at his job. He gets to the island, he gets captured, he escapes, then he has the boat chase, so it's a lot more effective than in the book. One that I would recommend. Next one, Fear is the Key. Okay, so Barry Newman appeared in the film. It's not a standard Alistair MacLean thriller. There's no secret agents as such, and there's no big scheme going on behind it. Basically, the guy wants revenge for a wrongdoing. He's a marine salvage expert, and the bad guys are after $80 million of uncut diamonds and gold, which are aboard a sunken aircraft. Very, very simple story. The film starts off with our guy John Talbot, Barry Newman. He hears this plane shot down, and then we next see him in Louisiana, same place that Live and Let Die, the second half of it, where the boat chase was filmed, is set up. There's a huge car chase that lasts about 15 minutes. There's pretty much exactly the same as something in Smokey and the Bandit. We then go on and we follow him as he basically goes on his mission to get revenge for this wrongdoing that's happened to him. I won't reveal too much because the film actually plays out very, very well. It follows the book almost word for word. I don't want to reveal too much because it's quite a twisty story, and I think that it would be worth your time. Next one is When Eight Bells Toll. When Eight Bells Toll, the book and the film are virtually the same. This was Anthony Hopkins' first big starring role. He plays a guy called Philip Calvert, who is a marine salvage expert. Wow, we've seen this plot before, but he's also a secret agent. Bullion ships are being lost in the Irish and Scottish coasts by a gang who are scuttling the ships and unloading them of the gold. They're holed up in a castle. The film has a different ending to the book. In the book, Calvert gets into the castle and the bad guys seemingly capture him, but then the Royal Marine Commandos move in and say, okay, you're all under arrest, and then Calvert reveals what he knows. The film, basically shit blows up. Calvert gets into the castle and then all sorts of hell starts breaking loose. Depending on your point of view, either the book or the film's ending is going to be more satisfying. I personally like both, although I'd lean more towards the film. The film is very, very snappy. It only lasts 90 minutes, but it tells an awful lot of story in that time. Some good action in it, and Anthony Hopkins is on good form. He looks great. He's in great shape. Might have made a good James Bond. Next up, we're into the top two, The Guns of Navarone. David Niven, Stanley Baker, Gregory Peck, two radar-laid guns, a whole load of Allied troops that need to be relieved and helped out, and there's an Allied naval squadron moving in. The guns need to be taken out before the naval squadron arrive on the island. Impossible mission, hard-jawed heroes. The book and the film are virtually identical. The ending is a real sting. Are they going to be able to destroy these guns or not? I won't spoil anything. Top one. You've probably seen this coming if you've seen this channel and you've heard my comments on my video that I did with Kevin at Seagulls Gather, and when we were discussing our top war films. Richard Burton, Clint Eastwood, Broadsword calling Danny Boy. There's a castle off a mountain. There's lots of snow. Richard Burton has a fight on top of a cable car. Clint Eastwood mows everybody down in sight. Lots and lots of shit blows up. Nothing is as it seems. Darren Nesbitt looks completely out of his depth like he did in that episode of The Prisoner. It's Where Eagles Dare. My absolute favourite Alistair MacLean film, my absolute Alistair MacLean novel, probably, definitely my favourite war film, and one of my favourite films ever made. I will leave this there. Thank you very much for watching, and have a really good day. Broadsword out.